Hey, so thanks for agreeing to debate me today. Sorry for the delay. I'm at a friend's house, so using a range of different devices has been a bit tricky. I think this case is actually pretty simple from the proposition side. Um, in terms of what I support, I believe that this is a debate about whether or not parents are entitled to teach their children to follow in a circumstance in which they feel that that's a thing that they want to do. So that this isn't like parents have a positive moral obligation to do this. It's like parents should have the right to do this. So in essence, this is a status quo act, given that the vast majority of parents choose to raise their children right now, and there's no social coercion attempting to stop them. That is to say, I think that my opponent needs to demonstrate that it would be a wrong act to teach their children to follow their religion. And the simple thing to say there is that, but I mean, if that's contestable, it doesn't really change the debate so much. So the first argument that I want to make here is that I think this makes the relationship between parents and children a lot stronger. The reason here are pretty trivial. Religion is an important and large part of a person's life. It comprises a huge amount of their time. Obviously, it's a huge amount of the way in which they think about the world. Thirdly, it comprises a lot of the value judgments that people are able to make about one another. That is to say, if you're a person with a genuine and deeply held religious faith, you're likely to feel closer to other people that have that deeply held religious faith because you're likely to be more empathetic to them and feel that they're better moral people. Being unable to share that with your children then necessarily means that the relationship between a parent and child is likely to be less dense. You're less likely to trust your child because you don't think they're being necessarily given the correct values, or at least the correct framework for understanding the values that you prefer to them to have. They have radically different experiences to the ones that you, given that you were probably raised in the religion yourself, are likely to have in that instance. You're likely to be more concerned for them because you're not able to raise them in the way that you want to. And all of those things then place limits on the kind of closeness of a relationship that you can have with your child, which is bad, trivially, because the relationship between a parent and child being very close is important to a child being raised in a way that is successful. It impacts the child's self-esteem if they feel that the parent doesn't love them enough. It impacts their ability to sort of have pleasurable experiences in terms of just having fun with your parent. And of course, it also impacts on other areas of life, the amount of time your parent is potentially willing to spend rearing you and things like that. I've got another argument here about why I think it's good to raise your children in that relationship, but for now, I'll just turn the mic over.
So just to confirm, you believe that allowing children to choose their own religious beliefs destroys relationships?
Oh no. If a parent is teaching their child to choose this religion and the parent turns away from it, and there's been a good faith effort there, then I think potentially the relationship could stay strong. With that said, it's undeniably true that in a lot of circumstances, if you turn away from your parent's religion, then your parent is, if you're an extremist, going to hate you. I just think that that's sort of like an undeniable premise of this debate, and it's sort of an unavoidable thing. I think there is definitely a middle ground of parents who are likely to understand, but for those parents, I think they'd feel much more comfortable if they had the opportunity to make their case in childhood, which is the best opportunity to do so.
Honing in on your extremist remark, so you believe that extremist parents should kind of like pass their religion down to their children?
I think it's one of those funny things. It's a question of should, but I think that it's like if they don't do that, there will be a great number of harms. I think it might be an abstract regrettable, but I think it would be better that those children were exposed to a religion that we consider extremist than that those parents just obviously make clear their contempt for their children from a young age.
I want to make sure I heard you correctly. You said that not teaching extremism is an abstract regrettable?
Not teaching extremism is, as I said, bad in the sense that it will manipulate the relationship between the parent and the child, and the parent is likely to behave badly to that. Also, when I talk about extremism, the religion doesn't necessarily need to be extremist. I'm talking about the depth of faith that the parent has in the religion. That's the thing that we're concerned with. Theoretically, you could have quite a modest religion theologically that doesn't make many impositions on you. It's just that you hold it incredibly deeply, and you'll really substantially retard the relationship if you don't.
Okay. As the candidate, I believe that regardless of the religious belief, be it good or bad, harmful or helpful, it is wrong to indoctrinate a child. Let children decide on their own what their religious beliefs are, and don't have parents just to teach their children what they should believe. Okay, so to address first in the definition, he says that this resolution is talking about an entitlement. No, it's not. It's talking about what parents should do. The resolution doesn't say parents should be allowed to teach their children their religion. That would be a completely different resolution. We discuss parental rights and freedom. This is about whether or not parents should teach their children to follow their religion. Now, to follow, dictionary.com defines this as to teach, to adhere to, or obey. So this is the idea that a parent should take their religion and import it onto their child and teach them to obey it. I argue that this is uncritical and unhelpful in all ways. The other thing I want to offer is a res analysis you can write down as description versus prescription. This resolution isn't saying that you can't teach your child about your religion. The resolution is saying parents should teach your children to follow their religion. So it's not about informing the child and allowing them to make rational decisions. It's about teaching them to obey the religion that the parent has. And that's what I take such big issue with. By the way, just much of the arguments about intimacy and relationships can be solved with normal education. You don't just have to indoctrinate your child to be close to them. And I think that's a repulsive concept. I'm going to have two main contentions. And these contentions are going to cover this. The first thing we're going to establish is what the weighing mechanism is for the round. The weighing mechanism should be the good of the child. There's no reasonable way for us to interpret this resolution outside of what is good for the child who is learning. With that, I'm going to have two contentions. One saying for bad religions, harmful religions, the resolution is terrible. And also even for the helpful, harmless religions, it is bad to teach it uncritically. So the first contention, if the religion is bad. Now, here's the thing. If you believe in a religion, you probably don't believe in most of the other religions because they're incompatible. Meaning that supporting this resolution means supporting that children should be fed with a barrage of false information and wrong beliefs. Much of this information, too, is extremely harmful. Now, I take serious issue with the rhetoric that my opponent uses, that not passing on extremism would be a regrettable act. I mean, talk about regrettable acts. Just this morning, a report came out from BuzzFeed that a suicide bomber drove an ambulance, killing dozens of people in Kabul. I wonder, is that a regrettable act? Is that more regrettable than not teaching a child to be an extremist, radicalist terrorist? I don't know. I think I'll let the audience make that decision. Point being, most religions are not compatible with each other. And supporting the resolution means supporting whatever religion a parent has in their head and just giving it to their child. Even if the religion is good, and this is the second contention, it is far better to allow a child to reach their own conclusions through rational inquiry. If the truth of this religion is so strong and powerful, then we won't need indoctrination to get there. Rational inquiry will show us the way. So even if it is there, children shouldn't be told to follow a religion. It's actually much better that they wander. They don't have to follow the exact paths of their parents. Rather, it's better that they ask questions and reach the conclusions for themselves. Corresponding to this, the arguments about empathy, we don't need indoctrination to have empathy. Thank you.
I think most of that, of course, is just chest beating about the right of a child to make up their own mind about things. But parents influence the decisions that children make in virtually all circumstances. That's essentially what being a parent is. An extreme analogy to combat the extreme analogy that my opponent provides. If a child is born as a sociopath and has a genuine and deep-seated desire to hurt other people, is it wrong for the parent to attempt to convince that child not to do so? I would say not, because even though that is indoctrination, we accept that the role of parents are in creating limits for their child and the beliefs that they have, setting a host of beliefs about what is empathetic for that child, and then sending that child out into the world where after that, that child is free to reject those conclusions if they choose to. That is to say, we acknowledge that the right that a parent has, because of the enormous amount of labor and effort that parent puts in, is that within reasonable bounds, that parent is able to make suggestions as to what that children's ideology ought to be like. And that suggestion making can be quite firm. I think there are a host of other questions. Would you teach your child that stealing is wrong? Because capitalism isn't objective or anything like that. Would you teach your child that it is wrong to hit other people? Would you teach your child that schooling is really important? Would you teach your child that a particular career is a good thing to pursue? They need to be able to tell you in this debate that all of those answers need to be in the negative, and it is wrong for parents to give guidance to their children unless there is an objective and solvable answer rather than a value judgment. And the fact that I think that that is difficult and absolutely not the kind of thing that a reasonable person would believe is an indication that the status quo provides an acceptable framework for parents making decisions about their child's religion, which is the ability to give your child a host of beliefs that you might have. The opposition then points to the idea that you're deceiving your child. You're not. Obviously, I think it's wrong to lie to your child. Teaching your child to follow a religion does not involve lying to them. It involves making a set of prescriptive value judgments that you believe personally to be true and that the state endorses as potentially true, given that the vast majority of states acknowledge that religions, for instance, should be entitled to special status through things like tax breaks, which is an indication that this doesn't need to involve lying to your child or anything morally wrong like that. You're just teaching them about a belief system, which, as I've already shown, is fine. The weirdest argument in this debate is the one about terrorism. I mean, I think that the obvious answer to that is a question outside of this motion, because I believe that people should not believe in religions in the first instance that pose extremism there. So I think that is a question to be resolved through the prior step. As is, I think that this motion, if you're not teaching them, if it's not the extremist religion that you're teaching them, you're probably still teaching them like hatred of the West or willingness to use suicide tactics or anything like that. And given that they're still comfortable teaching about your religion, you're probably still going to be informed about the context that gives rise to that terrorism.
Okay, a couple things. First, virtually every argument he has about informing children can be cross-applied to the res analysis that he doesn't respond to. We're not talking about teaching children about religion. We're talking about teaching children to follow a set religion. So he even uses the word, he literally, if you scroll back in the video, literally uses the word, it's okay to teach children about this. He uses the word about, but the resolution isn't talking about that. It's talking about teaching children to follow a religion. Don't let him escape out of the arguments of indoctrination by saying that it's this healthy education where children are still given a choice. To follow comes from dictionary.com, means to adhere or obey. So you're literally telling a child that they should obey and that they should adhere to this, not just giving them information, allowing them to choose. So first, his argument about guidance. He says, well, then we can't give any guidance, because after all, if we can't indoctrinate children with core religious beliefs that are not founded on any sort of information, well, then we also can't tell them not to be a sociopathic murderer. I mean, are we honestly going to pretend that the claims of religion are identical to claims about how we should say, not murder people in society? Of course not. The second thing is that this is not really a belief. Saying that you shouldn't hit someone isn't forcing your children to believe something. It's giving them guidance on how to interact in society. However, having them believe certain things about the afterlife, say, for example, that if they run into a building with a bomb strapped to their chest, that they go in an internal state of bliss, is extremely different. They have extremely different consequences. So of course you can give guidance. You just can't indoctrinate your children to believe a certain value system before they're capable of rationally accepting or rejecting. The second argument he makes is this. He says, well, children can accept it or reject it afterward. My response is that indoctrination is the precursor. The reason that children don't accept, that don't walk out and reject their parents' beliefs as often, the reason that people, by the way, are adults and are radicalized into religious extremism is because they've already been indoctrinated. It's the prerequisite. If you teach a child, a highly impressionable child who isn't capable of thinking rationally, to be X thing, then they're less likely to reject it when they're older. Why? Because you never gave them the tool of rational thought to begin with. See, my opponent's saying, oh, well, rational thought can just kick in when you turn. It's a terrible suggestion to begin with. But my argument is it probably won't, because they're less likely to use rational thought if they were told to ignore it at a young age. The third, he says, well, we're just kind of giving them values. No, this is following the religion that their parents have, not just saying be nice to people. So if that religion is extreme, which my opponent tries to push out of the resolution as not being a real thing, is he honestly going to say that extremist terrorism is not motivated by any religion ever? If not, then it's definitely inside the resolution. Also, hold on to his words. He says that not passing down extremism within the first line of cross-ex would be an abstract regrettable. An abstract regrettable. Like he uses those exact words and says, well, we would regret not passing extremism down. Extend all of the arguments about rational inquiry. Teach your child about religion and then allow them to make a choice. That solves for all the issues of relationship, solves for all the issues of indoctrination and harm, and solves for all the issues of misinformation. It is always better to present options and allow children to choose than forcing their choices onto a certain belief. Thanks.
Okay, so in the first instance, I think the analogy about capitalism here is actually pretty good. Parents are entitled to teach their kids to do things like not to steal, to obey the state. Even though those aren't objective claims, they're moral claims that are based in subjective values. And that's an acknowledgement that we allow parents to give guidance to their children. The opposition says that they're distinct. Well, it's true that they're sort of probably like smaller claims, like it's like more extreme to teach your child a religion than not to kill, but they're rooted in the same premise, which is just that we allow parents to make subjective moral judgments and then pass those down to their children, in acknowledgement of the fact that it is not exclusively, like my opponent earlier did have this like weird framing thing where he's like, oh, the rights of the children are literally the only thing. But in reality, of course, we have an interaction generally acknowledged of the rights between a parent and a child in recognition of the fact that parents give up an astonishing amount on behalf of their children. So we allow them to do some sort of sets of limited things, or at least have historically, and the vast majority of people would acknowledge there are some sorts of rights there. We hear the idea that you can just inform the person and that accomplishes everything that I'm describing. That's nonsense, and that just ignores the argument that I made right at the start of this. If you're informing someone about something, but it's not a religion that they're picking up because like they don't want to, because religion frequently makes choices that are unappealing for a child. Like they need to go to a mass on a Sunday or whatever, it is more difficult for you to feel close to your child because they're not making moral choices that you're likely to respect. They're not making choices in a way that you're likely to regard as being the kind of choices that a good person would make, that is likely to make you panic, that is likely to make you be afraid for their soul. To talk about this argument about terrorism, I think that so parents can pass down the religion. Extremism comes from a variety of sources. And the opposition supports passing down all of the other ones. Like the kind of fact that you hate the West, for example, the fact that you believe that there is like a genuine moral acceptability to violence, the fact that you believe that other people's lives are sometimes not worth it. Those are claims that can be founded in a religious basis. But given that my opposition is still comfortable with parents teaching kids not to be violent, presumably this motion excludes moral teachings. It's just not about making religions the thing. And in that instance, it's likely, I think, realistically, that almost exactly the same amount of extremism is likely to happen. Because if you're raised, because the reason that we find terrorism weird is because it's a subversive idea to be a terrorist, because we're all raised with the moral belief that violence is sort of wrong when it's used in that form. But given that apparently this debate excludes parents from teaching their kids not sort of that circumstance, that seems fine. The final thing to note is I agree, this is sort of like semi-indoctrination, but it's not that powerful in the sense that like you're not chained to it. You still are capable of rational inquiry. Many people who are raised religious aren't religious in the future. And what that's an indication of is that for the cases in which it's genuinely quite a bad idea, it's highly likely that.
Okay, so first we have to distance ourselves from the idea of moral teachings from the idea of religion. My opponent's saying, well, if you don't vote for semi-indoctrination, I'm shocked he would even go so far as to say that he supports that. At any level, indoctrination and uncritical thought should be rejected. Why are we having a debate using rational arguments if indoctrination is ever okay? Okay, that whole thing set aside. For my opponent to say that moral teachings and general social etiquette is completely on the same plane with abstract religious beliefs, with telling your child that the world is not actually a spinning globe of matter and carbon. It's actually just on top of an endless stream of turtles. That those two pieces of information are identical and should be treated the same is hogwash. Everyone watching this round knows that there's a difference between general moral principles, like how you should behave in society so that you won't die or get thrown in prison, and the religious dogma that we're talking about. There's a huge difference between the two. The first thing is extend arguments about extremism. My opponent, like for some reason, feels like the resolution has an asterisk by it that says parents should teach their children to follow their religion, asterisk, if the religion is really good. The resolution doesn't say that. And there are tons of resolutions. I mean, if my opponent supports one resolution, he probably doesn't support most other resolutions that aren't compatible with this, meaning that he actually does support parents giving their children misinformation. Because teaching children to follow a religion, if the religion is full of misinformation, which most of them have to be, by logical deduction, most of them have to be, means you're giving your children false information. That's indoctrination, and that's wrong. Okay, the second thing is he says, well, it's technically legal for a parent to, say for a child to be a capitalist. Okay, the entitlement argument has nothing to do with the resolution. The resolution doesn't say parents should be allowed. It says parents should teach their children to follow. It does not just talk about what's theoretically possible or even legal. It asks what actions should parents be taking. So this argument has nothing to do with the resolution whatsoever. Lastly, let's distinguish basic moral teachings from religious indoctrination. If you tell a child, hey, if you hit people, you'll go to jail. And if you hit people, other people in society won't like you. And if you hit people, it'll be very difficult for you to have a life. You are still giving the child an option. You are giving them information and saying, here are the consequences of either side. Now, you ultimately choose. But we don't say, we don't walk up to children and say, hey, don't question this. Don't question this at all. Just believe X about other people. We give them choices and allow them to decide. No reasonable parent forces their children to believe certain things. They always allow them to decide. The last thing is semi-indoctrination. Look, at the moment my opponent is willing to concede that the resolution is asking us to semi-indoctrinate. At any level, that's a bad thing. Critical thought is always most powerful. Lastly, the truth is powerful. If this religion is true, and if it actually is the real deal, then rational inquiry will get us there. If it is in fact the real thing, we don't need indoctrination to find it. Rational inquiry will take us all the way.
Crazy. Like, I don't know. My parents didn't go like, the reason that you don't hit people or the reason that you don't steal is because you'll incur social consequences. You'll go to jail, people will think weirdly of you, things like that. the reason that I was given for those things by virtually all instruments in the community is that it's wrong. That it's wrong to intrude upon another person's space, that it's wrong to make another person feel pain, that it's wrong to take another person's things. And I wasn't really given a lot of critical room there, you know? Like, we didn't have classes in which there was like a pro and a con, and we were like, is it okay to hit someone? Those were told to us as objective moral claims about the world that we were indoctrinated in universally across human societies, pretty much, that it's wrong to kill and things like that, and that we were indoctrinated in those things. And that is in a that rearing involves setting guardrails for children's behavior. That is sometimes indoctrination, right? The opposition wants to pretend that that is a word that is just totally unacceptable to use here. But of course, it's not entirely the most effective. It's like indoctrination in the sense that you're telling a child a thing to believe, and they're your parents, you have a degree of control over them. My opposition uses indoctrination as if we're talking about it like you're fucking strapping someone to the chair like in Clockwork Orange and just shoving shit down their eyes until they literally can't think. But we know that a huge number of people critically think about the religion that they're given as a child and things like that, which is why a huge number of people turn away from that or change the scope of their engagement. This is about the way in which a child behaves in their childhood. And here's the funny thing, right? My opposition standard is like, oh, well, it's okay to indoctrinate people into moral beliefs and tell them things are right and wrong if it will make their life more difficult socially, right? So you're allowed to say that it's wrong to steal in a circumstance in which you genuinely believe that stealing is going to get your kids sent to jail or fucked up or whatever. But my case is about the way in which teaching a child religion makes it easier for them socially, for the pretty simple reason that it will make the relationship with the parent a great deal more difficult, and that has super damaging consequences for both parties, but particularly the child who might genuinely feel unloved. And that's relevant because we have not heard a great deal of response to that. The final thing to talk about here is about extremism. So extremism that gives way to violence, well, obviously, as I've identified, that is a circumstance that is highly likely to arise with or without this motion. And it seems crazy to try to presuppose a motive on people. And given that the opposition is very comfortable with the teaching of literally all of the other elements that give rise to extremism, I think that we should just incorporate that in the general assessment, that sometimes beliefs that are being taught are bad ones, but we acknowledge sometimes in human societies, some people are bad and will pass down bad things. And it's regrettable when they do, but it doesn't counteract the vast majority of instances. Like, both teams need to be absolute.
Okay. Just to confirm, do you support parents teaching their children harmful religions?
Like harmful religions in what sense? Are you talking about like being a terrorist, so like externally harmful, or like doing things that are sort of like harmful to yourself?
Take any religion that mitigates issues like rape, that places men as having a higher worth than women, that supports things like, you know, the treatment of people that are different, that would support violence, aggression. I mean, I could go on and on and on. Any belief within religion that's harmful, do you support parents teaching their children to follow that?
Yeah, I do. And the reasoning is actually pretty simple if you run it through my case. There are two components to the teaching a child sort of moral values in those settings. So it's not like that kid is going to get a liberal education. They're still going to be taught in an ethical value sense, like the role of women in the community and things like that. And that is outside of this motion. That is an ethical teaching that apparently is not something that should not be. But given that that harm has already occurred, you are also going to substantially retard the relationship between the parent and the child.
You're saying society's already going to teach people how to treat women. So why do we have issues like rape in society? Why does that happen?
That's like literally a non sequitur. We have rape in society because it's difficult to enforce laws against it, because a substantial number of people believe that it's acceptably morally, including, incidentally, a large number of atheists and a large number of people in religions that believe it's wrong also have issues like rape.
You literally just told me that all of the issues out of a bad religion will be fixed by society's teachings. So why do we have entire communities of radicalized religious groups that are willing to abuse women? Why does that happen?
I made the opposite claim. If you have an entire community that is willing to treat women badly, then children, even if they're not being raised religiously, are still going to be raised with the moral values of that community, which include the acceptability of treating people badly.
How does that possibly impact the resolution? You're saying if we don't teach them religion, they're still going to get the religion?
Yes. A mitigatory claim. It's to say that this has no impact on those sort of extreme circumstances in the way you describe. But in that context, we should still be willing to accept the trade-off to improve the quality of the relationship with the parent.
Okay. The simple argument here, just on that question line, is that the values that are really bad are coming from the religion. So if a religious teaching is that women are less valuable than men, and that if you blow up a bunch of people that you'll go to an eternal state of bliss forever, those values are coming from the religion. My opponent is saying, well, it's not going to matter at all, because even if you don't teach the religion, they're still going to get the values from elsewhere. The values are coming from the religion. That's the whole reason that they're willing to blow themselves up, is because they believe that there's something after it. Beliefs about the afterlife come from religion. They don't come from this external book that's unrelated to the religious beliefs. So yes, by actually teaching critical thought, you are going to mitigate the issues of bad information and harmful information. All right, let's step down. The first thing he says is that, well, we indoctrinate children into morality. This is not true at all. Indoctrination is teaching a child a belief uncritically. For example, I did this belief, you should do it too. That's an example of an uncritical form of education that doesn't ask children to think about why the action is good, but just says, because I have this religion. Notice how the resolution uses the word "their" possessive, because this is my religion, you should follow it too. That's an uncritical form of education, completely different from the critical forms of education. In philosophy class, by the way, in philosophy, even when you learn about basic etiquette growing up, you are encouraged to ask why. So why do we not hit people, Mom? Why do we not, why is murder a bad thing? And we'll get answers to those questions. But the resolution doesn't encourage these answers. It literally just says that parents should teach their children to follow their religion. It doesn't say that they should be given rational reasons for why. It certainly doesn't encourage children to think outside of their parents' beliefs. And this is the whole problem in American society. I love that my opponent brings up capitalism. One of the main problems with politics is that we are pressured into accepting our family's political beliefs. My opponent says that, well, this will damage relationships if we don't. Well, that's the whole problem with the belief system, that you can't have a relationship with someone who has a different belief. So turn his entire case. In my society, when you vote neg, you're actually voting for the idea that people can have relationships external of their beliefs because they're not core to your identity. If you identify with all of your political and religious beliefs, then yeah, it's going to be hard. You're going to continue fostering the systems of sacred thought, the systems of tribalism that force people into these identitarian circles, that breed things like indoctrination and radicalism. It's only by introducing rational thought, by allowing people to opt between beliefs, that you step outside of this cycle.
Opponent's case requires two premises that he's not proven and are not entitled to claim. The first is that parents, especially of kids who are in extremist societies, are going to be taught critical thought. I think in societies that are already sufficiently extremist to generate the problems that he identifies, that's pretty baked in the cake to the ethical system of those communities, and regardless of what happens, they're likely to be taught in essentially the same way. He secondly says that he wants a society in which, and just in that recent speech, in which people are able to engage on whatever basis they want, but as my case has demonstrated, because religion is so important, that's almost impossible.
So we can't even hear the last bit of his argument, but let's just establish the first one. This is just a misunderstanding of basic grammar. He says, well, it won't matter if we teach them critical thought because the systems are already so uncritical. But as I just argued in the last speech and he doesn't respond to, that non-critical thought comes from the religious beliefs. The idea that it's a good idea for you to strap bombs to yourselves and run into a building, for you to take a fighter jet and crash it into a river, or to crash into a group of people, to take a truck like just happened this morning in Kabul and drive it into people and kill them, is because of the religion. Not something external to the religion, but actually within the religion itself. So yes, if you actually teach that it's okay to not accept the religion, then yes, radicalization is going to go down. Because the whole point of radicalization is that it's not okay, that you have to follow exactly what was done before you, that you're locked into this tradition. That's the whole problem. So were my opponent actually able to prove that the real problem with radicalization lay outside religion, he might have a point, but he doesn't. This links back to the problem of religion, and teaching people to be critical about it will help make it better. I'm going to step down into a couple voting issues. The first is relationships. Now, my opponent has literally attempted to outweigh the problems of terrorism, extreme. I think he's literally told everyone in this group, yes, I support parents passing down extremism because of the relationship that child. I mean, I look at the indoctrinated relationships children have with their parents, where they're zombies, incapable of actually questioning things and thinking critically, and just looking like, oh, wow, I really wish that I had that growing up. Such a darn shame that I was given tools like critical thought and rational thinking. That's such a shame. No one ever thinks that, and no one should. The best relationships are when you don't base your identity on your beliefs, when you're allowed to be a Democrat or a Republican, regardless of what your parents were. Could anyone watching this really wish that we had been forced into our parents' belief systems, really wish that we had been told to follow their beliefs without questioning, really wished that we couldn't be another belief besides our parents and that we were locked into that lest we lose them entirely? I think absolutely not. The second is indoctrination. Indoctrination is never okay. If the truth is really powerful, the kids will find it by rational thought. And my opponent can't escape the fact, I mean, literally uses the word semi-indoctrination to get there, can't escape the fact that indoctrinating your children into religion is a bad thing. I want you to actually extend the arguments about extremism. These do come from religion. The belief that the afterlife outweighs this life is what encourages people to take such drastic action. Look at the Crusades. Look at terrorism. If parents do teach your children to follow this uncritically, extremism will continue.